jest teoria, moi drodzy, lorowa, związana z Elden Ringiem, że Elden Ring jest grą o grzybach i DLC to niby udowadnia. Nie wiem, o co biega. Także lukniemy sobie. To jest film od Zajostorma. Napisy takie pseudo są wygenerowane. I let's go!
A little over a year ago, I made a video talking about how Elden Ring was about mushrooms. And in that video, we explore a lot of the imagery used in the game that finds its basis in mycology. Now, the thing we need to understand about Elden Ring is that the game is a conglomeration of tons of visual and thematical influences. The three major ones being mythological influence, alchemical and occult influence, and then botanical. But today I want to focus...
Te botaniczne wpływy są bardzo widoczne, na przykład jak pomyślisz sobie o Scarlet Rocie. To jest niby, wiesz, zgnilizna, niby jakieś przekleństwo swego rodzaju, a to ma bardzo dużo związku z kwiatami, nie? Z roślinnością.
On one of the major themes of the game. Because I believe by framing the story under the guise of mushrooms, we not only get a clearer picture of how many of the game's fundamental laws work, but also what I believe are very obvious and...
Zresztą w ogóle zobaczcie, że te status efekty, one mają dużo wspólnego właśnie z roślinami. Nawet Saint Trina, tutaj zobacz, otoczenie tych kwiatów, śpiących lilii, tak? Lilietriny, sam item. To jest niesamowite. Efekty, które w grze po prostu gameplayowo mogą być uznawane za bardzo negatywne, nawet lorowo mogą być uznawane za bardzo negatywne, nieraz wizualnie, od strony czysto estetycznej są pokazywane jako coś pięknego. I moim zdaniem to też niesie ze sobą sporo przekazu.
Intended answers to some of the game's most unexplained lore questions. But to begin today, we need to understand how the story of Elden Ring is laid out. When we try to unpack the history of the lands between, one thing that becomes abundantly clear is that history is written by the victors. All throughout the game, we find evidence of civilizations that have come and gone, overwritten by the passage of time and the scrubbing of their history by the winners of the war. Civilizations are built over the dead, rising up from the decay.
To prawda, w kółko, tam najpierw były smoki, potem mieliśmy, wiesz, tyglarzy, potem wygnano różne nieczystości, takie właśnie jak wynaturzeńców czy omeny i próbuje się ukrywać ich istnienie. Cały czas buduje się na zwłokach poprzedników tak naprawdę nową historię i o starej za wszelką cenę stara się zapomnieć.
I mean, the entirety of the lands between is literally built on the decaying corpses of primordial.
Wy wiecie, że ja nigdy nie zwróciłem uwagi na to, że to jest kuźwa czacha? Nigdy nie zwróciłem na to uwagi, że to jest czacha giganta. Myślałem, że to jest po prostu skała. Ale kurna jaja.
I mean, the entirety of the lands between is literally built on the decaying corpses of primordial giants. I think there might be a little hint going on here, and it's most explicit in the Erd tree itself. So let me show you something here. For a long time in the community, there was a debate about the Erd tree being one or two trees. Whether it was always this magnificent golden tree, or if it was something else and the gold was new. But the visual evidence here ultimately points to two separate things. A regular tree of wood with the gold as its outer coating, which can be clearly seen at the Elden Throne and the entrance to the tree itself. But the most interesting part of this, in my opinion, can be found at the very top of the Erd tree within its canopy. You can see it normally with the telescope, but if you use a camera mod, you can get a really good look at what's happening up here. At the top of the Erd tree, we can see a battle between the wood and the gold, with the gold emitting these little feelers that seem to be taking over the wooden tree. We can see that the tree inside the gold is dead. And these...
To dosłownie jest w sumie symbolika tego, że stare ideały są nadpisywane zupełnie nowymi. Kurde, tutaj wszystko, nawet wizualnie ten lore jest wyrażany.
Golden tendrils are spreading along the wood. You can see very clearly here that the wood and the gold are not the same. The life of the tree only comes from the gold, and whatever is left beneath has long since lost its glory. There's a very direct and interesting real-life parallel here with a slime mold, which feed on and decompose dead trees, even down to their golden color. The behavior here is almost exact with what we see going on in the Erd tree. While relatively recent research has suggested that slime molds are not fungi, they found as a matter of fact that they're actually a type of eukaryotic amoeba, which just so happens to be what the Elden Beast design is based off of. Now, is that a coincidence or not? But despite that, they still shared the same principle of feeding off of the dead and emitting spores, which is interesting considering that the gold of the Erd tree is sustained from the dead of the lands between. The bodies of the dead in the lands between are brought to the Erd tree roots to be assimilated into them.
Tak, one są wchłaniane, bo to jest prawo regresji, czyli wracasz do początku, do swojej genezy. To jest cały ten cykl życia. To jest teoretycznie ten nowy wymiar śmierci w świecie eldenowym, nie? Bo de facto śmierć śmierci nie ma, bo run śmierci został wyjęty z eldeńskiego kręgu i zapieczętowany u Malikefa, natomiast drzewo wchłania te wszystkie, wiesz, te wszystkie właśnie ciała, oni się jednoczą z tym drzewem i to jest ich inna forma tak naprawdę wyrażenia śmierci.
By sustaining the Erd Tree. And we'll talk about this practice more in detail in regards to the DLC in a bit, but in
Są jak nawóz, kurde, może dla tego drzewa. Kto wie, może bez nich wcale to Earth Tree by tak się nie pieło.
context to our real-life counterpart of the slime mold, this is exactly the kind of thing it would thrive off of. Let's consider something else as well, the golden seed. The description of the seed talisman states that these seeds were thought to not exist, due to the perfection of the Erd Tree, but when the Elden Ring was shattered, these seeds scattered all across the lands between. That sounds a lot less like seed behavior to me, rather than spores, as in relation to our slime mold, the way it releases its spores is after being disturbed or broken. But one other thing, did you ever notice the mushrooms in the lands between glow with the exact same gold as the Erd Tree? And I think that choice there is very deliberate. Now, am I saying through all of this that the Erd Tree is a mushroom, a slime mold, a fungus? Not entirely. It is still in the game's world presented as a tree. However, by understanding the imagery from software chose to use, we can better understand the themes they're trying to convey. And let me give you another example. A large part of the lore in Elden Ring's DLC focused on the fingers. Now, the two fingers specifically were a big part of the original.
Ej, te palce jako motyw i w podstawce, i w DLC jeszcze mocniej tak naprawdę uwypuklony. Powiem szczerze, że są strasznie niepokojące dla mnie. Nie wiem, mega dziwne to jest takie. Strasznie dziwny wybór, że akurat palce. No ale cóż, Miyazaki sobie wymyślił, to ma, nie?
Original Mushroom Theory video. And in that video, we present that the two fingers were likely based on a mushroom in real life called the Dead Man's Fingers. Now, not only has the DLC reinforced the idea of the two fingers being types of mushrooms, it has outright confirmed the inspiration of the Dead Man's Fingers, with the addition of a new item called the Finger Mimic. Its description reads, light pink mushroom resembling a wizened finger,
Mushroom
exceedingly
resembling.
rare to find, used by those who wish to become fingers to induce hallucinations. They call these mushrooms the stillborn of the two fingers. Now, right off the bat, we know that the design of these finger mimics, while being confirmed to be mushrooms, are quite literally the Dead Man's Finger mushroom. But
Oh,
this brings
kurde.
about a few questions. Firstly, why? If the two fingers are actually mushrooms, or at least communicated with that theme in the same way the Erd Tree is, then that would make perfect sense in context of their role in the game's lore. In the game, the job of the two fingers is to be a mediary between the greater will and the inhabitants of the lands
Tak,
between.
one raz na kilka tysięcy lat się poruszają i wtedy staruchy czytające z palców przekazują wieści od wyższej woli z tych palców. Porąbane to jest.
They are, as far as we know, the only things able to make contact with the greater will itself. This is reflective of a mushroom's role in an ecosystem, as besides decomposing dead matter, mushrooms are messengers, able to send and receive signals from trees and communicate to other plants in the ecosystem.
Poważnie grzyby mają taką rolę w ekosystemie? Co ty mówisz? Ale to jest ciekawe.
Through something known as the Great Mycelial Network. This is an intertwining web beneath the ground between mycelium strands and tree roots, where they pass along a wide range of signals between themselves, whether it be danger, alerting of food, or other things that we're still on the cusp of learning about. Now, one thing you'll notice about the Erd Tree is that
Ty
there is
zobacz,
no
grzyby to znacznie więcej niż tak sobie pomyślisz, nie? Bo to rośnie gdzieś tam nad ziemią tylko, no kurde, ty to się pnie. Cała linia po prostu sieć przekazu.
nowhere in this game that its roots
Informacji.
don't touch. Even in the Land of Shadow, we see the spread of Deathroot, meaning that the Erd Tree roots reach here as well. But each of the two fingers is stationed atop the Divine Towers, which are great structures that themselves are built into the land, perhaps even into the roots of the tree. And if these are merely just stone towers, then why do we find the fingers in a bed of soil and grass atop them? The reality here is, the two fingers are always connected to the Erd Tree, even the one in the Round Table Hold, which is the only one we find alive, but we have lots of reason to believe that the Round Table Hold itself is either a projection through the Erd Tree's power or inside the Erd Tree itself. But the DLC shook up our understanding of the two fingers a bit, because we don't actually find any in the Land of Shadow, but we do find their mother, Metzr, who, like a mushroom, reproduces them asexually, though for a reason that is not specified, she no
Kurde.
longer gives birth to two fingers, but instead
Jezu, jak tu można wszystko powiązać. Ja za każdym razem, jak on stwierdza jakieś takie fakty, które są niby oczywiste, to jestem w szoku. Bo w życiu bym tego kurde do grzybów nie przypisał, a jednak to wszystko się zgadza. Ja pierniczę. I wiesz, Miyazaki, myślisz, że on czerpie często z astrologii. Zresztą ostatnio gadaliśmy o tym, że Elden Beast jest podobny do galaktyki Pingwin, tak? Ale zobacz, ile jednocześnie tutaj rzeczy się wiąże, bo przed chwilą mieliśmy jakąś tam amebę czy coś, tak? On w tym materiale pokazywał. To może być kilka nawiązań jednocześnie i wszystkie tak naprawdę mają bardzo dużo sensu.
Instead, the lesser and unpowerful finger creepers. Now, I made an entire lore video on Metter, but my personal theory as to why we don't see any more two fingers being born is because I believe Metter was wounded by the Nox through the use of the Finger Slayer blade, which has a description that tells us that not only is it bloody and used, but it's the proof of the high treason of the Nox, which led to punishment by the Greater Will. This is evidenced by the Finger Slayer blade being the only thing capable of harming envoys of the Greater Will.
O kurde, nie gadaj, że ten item się normalnie łączy z tym, jak Meter jest zdesignowana. Ja pierdzielę. No ale w sumie faktycznie wygląda, jakby była ranna.
Which of course Metter is, but also Metter being wounded in her belly, where she would harbor her children. Now, if you were wondering how exactly this connects back to mushrooms, well, check this out. The punishment for the Nox was banishment underground, beneath a false night sky. But let's examine this false night sky for a minute. As we can clearly see, these are not stars. I'm actually 100% confident that these are spores. If we look at these white spores above Nokrin, we'll see that they're suspended in the air, unmoving. And here we can find mushrooms of the exact same color, these known as the melted mushrooms. But that's really about it over in Nokrin. But if we go over to Noxtella, we see something very cool. Here, the stars, or what I believe are spores, are falling down to the ground, unlike over in Nokrin, where they don't move at all. But as we'll notice, since these fall down, all of the vegetation here is covered in white mycelium. The spores from above are infecting the plants, and of course it is the exact same color as the stars. It's not just like a white coating on the leaves, we can very clearly see veins of mycelium, exactly as it would be in real life. Also, there's a slime mold that looks just like this called Myxogastria, which might be where they got the idea. All of this just compounds to the idea that the Greater Will manifests its manipulations through the use of mushrooms, or from software chooses to communicate that through mushroom imagery. But that's all surface level. This idea of mushrooms and decomposition goes all the way to the very fundamentals of Elden Ring's world. Let's look at some other inhabitants that live beneath these underground spores. The ancestral worshippers. They worship the cycle of decomposition and growth from death. Take a look at the ancestor spirit's horn.
O kuźwa, no nie musisz tu dużo mówić. Faktycznie, jakby się przyjrzeć. No to jest coś na rzeczy.
That reads, item cut from the horns of the regal ancestor spirit. A number of new growths bud from the antler-like horns of the fallen king, each glowing with light. Thus does new life grow from death, and from death one obtains power. That is the main theme of Elden Ring's DLC, and how the story we have in the base game was set up, built literally from the death and slaughter that happened in the Land of Shadow. In the DLC, we can find a location called Bonnie Village, a town in ruin filled with nothing but ghosts and beings called the Greater Potentates. The butchering knife of these potentates tells us that they were used to dismember human bodies in the making of the great jars stored in the jails. And we learn from the tooth whip also found in this area that these shaman inhabitants of the village were chosen because their flesh was said to meld harmoniously with others. Now, where the base game inferred the true nature about the living jars, the DLC gives us a look inside. Inside the living jars are a conglomerate of flesh, with the base a skinned shaman. But bodies aren't the only things that go in the jars. The DLC also introduced the red flesh and white flesh mushrooms, and their descriptions read, mushroom that grows in sullen lands, easily found everywhere in the realm of shadow. The flesh of the mushroom is similar to raw meat and can serve as pot innards. Now, the practice of living jars containing bodies is nothing new. They exist in the base game, and as we discussed earlier, were used to fertilize the Erd tree. But there's more to this picture. The main area in the Land of Shadow is Inir Elim, the Spiral Tower. This is the path to divinity. But one thing you'll notice about Inir Elim, if you have a keen eye, is that everything here has bodies in it.
To prawda i to ostatnio żeśmy zauważyli, nie? Na jednym z filmów. Ja byłem w szoku, że wcześniej to pominąłem, ale to też wygląda, jakby to było zbudowane na czyichś szczątkach, albo jakby one próbowały się wspiąć wyżej, jeden na drugim. I to po raz kolejny daje nam właśnie tą symbolikę, że wiesz, z jednego rodzi się kolejne i ja pitole, co jest grane? Miyazaki po prostu dba o każdy najmniejszy szczegół.
Instead of fertilizing a tree, the bodies of the pots were used to build a tower. But like the tower itself,
i to też tak, kurde, faktycznie nawet grzybowo wygląda momentami.
As we see in the lands between, the trees
Nigdy
here
tak na
are
to nie
also
patrzyłem.
made of bodies. But the most important part of the tower is the divine gate, where the ascension to godhood takes place. And as we established, from death power. But take a look at this. The two beings that actually ascended to godhood here were Marika and Mikola. Their godhood fueled by the bodies of the Divine Gate and Enir Elim. That is where this power came from. And when we finally defeat Mikola, he leaves something behind. The circlet of light is the remnant of his godhood, the symbol which he gained upon his ascension. And its effect slightly boosts intelligence, faith, and arcane. This increase is emblematic of that godly power. Now remember that finger mimic mushroom we talked about earlier? Well, that's used to craft an item called the Finger Nostrum, and it has a description that reads, Bolus engraved with whorl-like lines. Boost mind, intelligence, faith, and arcane at the cost of gradual HP loss. A secret medicine of those who attempt to turn their human bodies into fingers. Ingesting causes something to wriggle within. So the Fingerprint Nostrum gives you the same effect as Mikola's circlet. It's that stat increase that's emblematic of godhood, but since there's no outer decomposition taking place, no death to gain power from, the ones who consume the nostrum begin to decompose themselves. That's why it doesn't just give you a stat increase, it also drains your health while using it.
Jezus Maria, nawet działanie itemu to nie jest kwestia tego, że chciano to jakoś zbalansować, tylko to po prostu lorowo ma sens, stary. To jest absurdalne dla mnie. To jest niepojęte. To jest jeden z najbardziej szokujących materiałów lorowych, jakie widziałem chyba od dawna. Nigdy nie patrzyłem na ten świat w ten sposób, ale tu wszystko, co jest przedstawiane, jasne, można powiedzieć, że to jest naciągane, ale daj mi wystarczająco dużo punktów, to narysuję ci linię, nie? I tutaj tak jest, że każdy pojedyncze to stwierdzenie mogłoby brzmieć jak coś naciągane, jak jakiś reach. Ale gdy masz je wszystkie zebrane do kupy, no to kurde, ciężko nie uwierzyć w to. To ma tyle sensu i zobacz, że ta cała boskość w Eldenie opiera się tylko i wyłącznie na tym, żeby poświęcić innych i z tego czerpać moc. Ja pierdzielę. Najpierw Marika, Mikela, potem...
That's why the creatures in the Finger Ruins are lampreys. They're leeches that need to steal life to maintain their power. And that's why the Finger Ruins themselves are barren wastelands. In order for power to emerge, there has to be death and decomposition. We see this as well with the Nox, in their attempt to replicate the technology of the tower to bring about their Lord of Night. But they were ultimately unsuccessful, perhaps due to the use of inorganic beings in the Silver Tears, which likely wouldn't have the life required to decompose and bring about godhood. It's the same story of the Halig tree with how Mikola had to water the tree with his own blood. It's the main fundamental law of power in the lands between. It's why the ancestors worship the cycle, because they realized that. So by understanding that law, we can understand why so much mushroom imagery is used in the game. But if you're still not convinced, then let's talk about some more. Ronnie's design is a play on a mushroom called the indigo milk cap, as seen when she's sitting on her throne.
Nie, no bez przesady. Bez przesady, stary. To śmierdzi. To jest już za mocne akurat.
The sides of her cloak show only the part of her robe which would be the stem of the mushroom, and of course her hat would form the mushroom cap, with the underside having those same dark blue ridges and a top of white. And also on a side note, in order to become a lord of her age, she too must die in a sense, killing her physical body in an act of self-decomposition.
No tak
Godwyn on the other side of the coin died in soul, and his body became a literal fungus on the Erd tree, causing the spread of the Deathroot curse. And his design, while being mostly aquatic based, is a play on an oyster mushroom. It's also got that flat...
Dobra, zaraz wymiotuję, nie? Co jest grane?
top with the same ridges and folds as we'll find out in the wild on dead and decaying trees. And you'll also notice that the ghosts who are unable to die a true death because of the Deathroot curse are always seen with accompanying mushrooms sprouting out of the ground around them, and also with that ghastly hue. Now ironically, I don't want to touch on the Scarlet Rot very much, because while it may be the most direct and literal form of mushroom in the game, I think the picture here is just pretty obvious, and the outer god of rot doesn't seem to go beyond decomposition, and it's much less sophisticated with the way the Greater Will utilizes these things. If we were to sit here and talk about each way the god of rot utilizes mushrooms, then this video would probably be an hour long, and I'm sure most of you get the picture of what's going on here. So while it is a major force in the game, you get it. More mushrooms.
Nie no, kurwa. Co ty mówisz? Jakim cudem? Przecież to są kwiaty, nie grzyby. No jak to?
Picture of what's going on here. So while it is a major force in the game, you get it. More mushrooms. Now, if you're someone that watched my original mushroom theory video, then you may have noticed the different direction I chose to take. Where in that video we took a much more literal stance on the Erd tree specifically
Przeciekawa
being
teoria,
a type
nie?
of fungus. In context of the DLC, I understand now that the imagery was not supposed to be taken literally, but is supposed to be a signpost pointing towards that greater theme, power from death in the essential decomposition. Now, there's even more aspects we could go further down this rabbit hole with, such as the cursed children of the union of America and Radagon, and how their curses stem from the idea of asexual reproduction. Again, a decomposition of them.
I za każdym razem to pytanie sobie należy zadać, nie? Kiedyś chyba nawet film Damiana Ptaka na ten temat oglądaliśmy. Jest reakcja na kanale, że czy to wszystko Miyazaki faktycznie ma w głowie, gdy te gry tworzy, czy połowa tych rzeczy jest dodawana przez nas? Ja powiem wam szczerze, że wierzę głęboko, że on to wszystko ma w bani, ale jest to absurdalnie poryte.
In those curses,
On
or
sam
how
był
the
po grzybach,
man-eating
no.
Miranda flowers produce sprouts that look a little bit like the Erd tree in my opinion. But I think we get the picture now, and I hope I've been able to communicate that properly. But the thing to keep in mind here is that through the use of mycological imagery, it's just one of the many building blocks that make Elden Ring so unique. And for further examples of what I'm talking about there, I recommend checking out Max Durat's video on Mesmer and the Abyssal Serpent, because you'll see another side of how they use these things to communicate greater themes. But y'all let me know down in the comments section, do you agree with much of what I presented in this video? Do you think we took things in the right direction?
Nie, to
or
brzmiało
did we
giga
get off on
sensownie.
a completely unintended tangent? I'm curious to see what y'all think. Anyways though guys, if you enjoyed today's video, be sure to leave a like on it and subscribe if you're new around here. But with all that, I will catch you in the next one.
Świetny materiał. Kurde, jaki jestem zszokowany teraz po tym. Nie wiem, to nie dość, że to dotyczy tylko DLC, ale również i podstawki i to zupełnie zmienia spojrzenie. Jakby jasny kierunek lorowy dalej jest ten sam, ale można na te same rzeczy popatrzeć w zupełnie nowy sposób teraz. Boże święty.